Meyer Shapiro's The Still Life as Personal Object, a note on Heidegger and Van Gogh. In his essay on the origin of the work of art, Martin Heidegger interprets a painting by Van Gogh to illustrate the nature of art as a disclosure of truth. He comes to this picture in the course of distinguished three modes of being: of useful artifacts, of natural things, and of works of fine art. He proposes to describe the first without any philosophical theory, a familiar sort of equipment, a pair of peasant shoes, and to facilitate the visual realization of them, he chooses a well-known Van Gogh who painting by Van Gogh, who painted such shoes several times. But to grasp the equipmental being of equipment, we must know how shoes actually serve. For the peasant woman, they serve without her thinking about them or even looking at them. Standing and walking in the shoes, the peasant woman who knows the serviceability in which the equipmental being of the equipment consists. But we, as long as we only imagine a pair of shoes in general, or simply look at the empty, unused shoes as they merely stand there in the picture, we shall never discover what the equipmental being of equipment in truth is. In Van Gogh's painting, we cannot even tell where these shoes stand. There is nothing surrounding this pair of peasant shoes in or to which they might belong, only an undefined space. There are not even clods from the soil of the field or the path through it sticking to them, which might at least hint to their employment. A pair of peasant shoes and nothing more. And yet, from the dark opening of the worn inside of the shoes, the toilsome tread of the worker stands forth. It is stiffly solid. In the stiffly solid heaviness of the shoe, there is an accumulated tenacity of her slow trudge through the far-spreading and ever-uniform furrows of the field, swept by a raw wind. On the leather there lies the dampness and saturation of the soil. Under the soles there slides the loneliness of the field path as the evening declines. In the shoes there vibrates the silent call of the earth, its quiet gift of the ripening corn and its enigmatic self-refusal in the fallow desolation of the wintry field. This equipment is pervaded by the uncomplaining anxiety about the certainty of bread, the wordless joy of having once more withstood want, the trembling before the advent of birth and shivering at the surrounding menace of death. This equipment belongs to the earth and is protected in the world of the peasant woman. From out of this protected belonging, the equipment itself rises to its resting in self. Professor Heidegger is aware that Van Gogh painted such shoes several times, but he does not identify the picture he has in mind, as if the different versions are interchangeable, all presenting the same truth. A reader who wishes to compare this account with the original picture or its photograph will have some difficulty in deciding which one to select. 8 paintings of shoes by Van Gogh are recorded by the De La Fayal in his catalogue of all the canvases by the artist that had been exhibited at the time Heidegger wrote his essay. Of these, only 3 show the dark opening of the worn insides, which speaks so distinctly to the philosopher. There are clearly pictures of the artist's own shoes, not of the shoes of the peasant. They might be soles he has worn in Holland, but the pictures were painted during Van Gogh's stay in Paris in 1886 to 87. One of them bears the date 87. From the time before 1886, when he painted Dutch peasants, are the 2 pictures of shoes, a pair of clean wooden clogs set on the table beside other objects. Later in Aries he represented, as he wrote in a letter of August 1888 to his brother, un paire de vieux soles, which are evidently his own. A second still life of Vieux Soles de Paysan is mentioned in a letter of September 88 to the painter Emily Bernard, but it lacks the characteristic worn surface and dark insides of Heidegger's description. In reply to my question, Professor Heidegger has kindly written that the picture which he referred to is the one he saw in a show at Amsterdam in March 1930. This is clearly the De La File number 255. There was also exhibited at the same time a painting with 3 pairs of shoes. And it's possible that the exposed sole of a shoe in this picture inside the reference to the sole in the philosopher's account. But from neither of these pictures, nor from any of the others, could one properly say that a painting of shoes by Van Gogh expresses the being or essence of a peasant woman's shoe in her relation to nature and work. They are the souls of the artist, by that time a man of town and city. Heidegger has written, "The artwork told us what shoes are in truth. It would be the worst self-deception if we were to think that our description, as a subjective action, first imagined everything thus, and then projected it into the painting. If anything is questionable here, it is rather that we experience too little in contact with the work, and that we express the experience too crudely and too literally. But above all, the work does not, as it might first appear, serve merely for a better visualization of what a piece of equipment is. Rather, the equipment being of the equipment first arrives at its explicit appearance through and only in the work. What happens here? What is at work in the work? Van Gogh's painting is the disclosure of what equipment the pair of peasant shoes is in truth. Alas for him, the philosopher has indeed deceived himself. He has retained from his encounter with Van Gogh's canvas a moving set of associations with peasants and the soil, which are not sustained by the picture itself, but are grounded rather in his own social outlook with the heavy pathos of the primordial and earthy. He has indeed imagined everything and projected it into the painting. He has experienced both too little and too much in his contact with the work. The error lies not only in his projection which replaces a close and true attention to the work of art, for even if he had seen a picture of a peasant woman's shoes as he describes them, it would be a mistake to suppose the truth he uncovered in the painting, the being of the shoes, is something given here and for all and is unavailable to our perception of shoes outside the painting. I find nothing in Heidegger's fanciful description of the shoes represented by Van Gogh that could not have been imagined by looking at a real pair of peasant shoes. Though he credits to art the power of giving to a represented pair of shoes that explicit appearance in which their being is disclosed, indeed the universal essence of things, world and earth in their counterplay. This concept of the metaphysical power of art remains here a theoretical idea. The example on which he elaborates with strong conviction does not support that idea. Is Heidegger's mistake simply that he chose the wrong example? Let us imagine a painting of peasant woman's shoes by Van Gogh. Would it not have been manifest just those qualities and that sphere of being described by Heidegger with such pathos? Heidegger would still have missed an important aspect of the painting, the artist's presence in the work. In his account of the picture, he has overlooked the personal and physiognomatic in the shoes, which made them so absorbing of subject for the artist, not to speak of the intimate connection with the peculiar tones, forms, and brush-made surface of the picture's painted work. When Van Gogh depicted the peasants' wooden sabots, he gave them a clear, unworn shape and surface like the smooth, still life objects he had set beside them on the small table, the bowl, the bottles, etc. In the later picture of a peasant's leather slipper, he had turned them with their backs to the viewer. His own shoes he has isolated on the floor, and has rendered them as if facing us, and so individual and wrinkled in appearance that we can speak of them in veridical portraits of aging shoes. We come closer, I think, to Van Gogh's feeling for these shoes in a paragraph written by Knut Hamsun in the 1880s in his novel Hunger, describing his own shoes. As I had never seen my shoes before, I set myself to study their looks, their characteristics, and when I stir my foot, their shapes and their worn uppers. I discovered that the creases and white seams give them an expression, impart my physiognomy to them. Sometimes of my own nature had sometimes something of my own nature had gone over into these shoes. They affected me, like a ghost of my other eye, a breathing portion of my very self. In comparing Van Gogh's painting to Hampson's text, we are interpreting the painting in a different way than Heidegger's. The philosopher finds in the picture of the shoes a truth about the world as it is lived by the peasant without reflection. Hampson sees the real shoes as experienced by the self-conscious contemplating wearer who is also the writer. Hampson's personage, a brooding self-observant drifter, is closer to Van Gogh's situation than the peasant's. Yet Van Gogh is in some ways like the peasant. As an artist he works, he is stubbornly occupied with a persistent task that is for him his inescapable calling, his life. Of course, Van Gogh, like Hampson, has also an exceptional gift of representation. He is also able to transpose to canvas with a singular power the forms and qualities of things, but they are things that have touched him deeply, in this case his shoes, things inseparable from the body and memorable to his reacting self-awareness. They are not less objectively rendered from being seen as if endowed with his feelings and reverie about himself. In isolating his own worn shoes on the canvas, he turns them to the spectator, which makes of them a piece from a self-portrait. That part of the costume which we tread the earth and in which we locate the strains of movement, fatigue, pressure, heaviness, the burden of the erect body in its contact with the ground. They mark the inescapable position on the earth. To be in someone's shoes is to be in his predicament or station of life. For a painter to represent his worn shoes as the main subject of a picture is for him to express a concern with the fatalities of his social being, not the shoes as an instrument of use, though the landscape painter as a worker in the field shares something of peasant's life outdoors, but the shoes as a portion of the self, in Hampson's words, are Van Gogh's revealing theme. Gauguin, who shared Van Gogh's quarters in Aries in 1888, sensed a personal history behind his friend's painting of a pair of shoes. He has told in his reminiscences of Van Gogh a deeply affecting story linked to Van Gogh's shoes. In the studio were a pair of big hobnailed shoes, all worn and spotted with mud. He made a remarkable still life painting. I do not know why I suspected that there was a story behind this old relic, and I ventured one day to ask him if he had some reason for preserving with respect what one ordinarily throws out for a rag picker's basket. My father, he said, was a pastor, and as urging I pursued theological studies in order to prepare for my future vocation. As a young pastor, I left for Belgium one fine morning without telling my family to preach gospel in the factories, not as I had been taught, but as I understood myself. These shoes, you see, have bravely endured the fatigue of that trip. Preaching to the miners in Bornage, Vincent undertook to nurse a victim of a fire in the mine. The man was so badly burned and mutilated that the doctor had no hope for his recovery. Only a miracle, he thought, could save him. Van Gogh tended to him for 40 days with loving care and saved the miner's life. Before leaving Belgium, I had, in the presence of this man who bore on his brow a series of scars, a vision of the crown of thorns, a vision of the resurrected Christ. Gauguin continues, and Vincent took up his palette again. Silently he worked. Beside him a white canvas. I had begun his portrait. I too had the vision of Jesus preaching kindness and humility. It is not clear which of the paintings with a single pair of shoes Gauguin had seen at Aries. He described it as violet in tone in the contrast to the yellow walls of the studio. It does not matter. Though written some years later and with some literary affections, Gauguin's story confirms the essential fact that for Van Gogh the shoes were a piece of his own life.